Well, wasn't that the most Hitler-esque State of the Union speech that you have ever heard in your life? My God, when he talked about D-Day and brought out the veterans, and then he brought out the survivors of the concentration camps, and that the guy at the Tree of Leaves synagogue who walked in just as the shooting started, the anti-Semite came in and tried to kill the Jewish people in the synagogue, and he was a survivor of the Holocaust. After 10 months in one concentration camp, was being brought to another concentration camp, put into those cattle cars, and then a soldier came out with a gun, and they thought that that was the end. And then the father said, "It's an American." And then the soldier that rescued the people from the concentration camp at Dachau was there too. And the other concentration camp survivor was right next to him, who was in Dachau. And how he talked about Jerusalem being the capital of Israel, because it's been the capital of Israel for 3,000 years. I mean, that was just so Hitler-esque. I mean, it's exactly when he said that anti-Semitism should be abolished across the whole world. I mean, that's exactly what Hitler would have said. And he would have dressed like that. He would have talked about capitalism and abolishing fascism and how this nation will never be a socialist country. It's exactly what Hitler would have said. I can see now, my eyes are open, why Antifa hates Trump so much. Because he's against socialism and for capitalism. And Antifa, Hitler, fascism, National Socialist Party. National Socialist Party. That's translation for Nazi. Huh. Okay, I guess it wasn't very Hitler-esque, was it? But you know what it was? That's the greatest State of the Union speech I have ever seen. Since Ronald Reagan. I'm sure Ronald Reagan did something very good too. Reagan was just so inspiring when you looked at Reagan and listened to him. You just felt American. America was just so great, you know. He made you feel that way. And the fact that the women in white stood up and cheered, and then Pelosi also clapped, but then she realized, clap, clap, oh, let me look through these papers. You know, sometimes she couldn't clap sometimes. She had to look through the papers. I don't know what she's reading, but maybe her dentures were slipping and she needed to lift up the paper so you didn't see the dentures slipping. You know, about the part that the children should not be aborted in the 3rd trimester, and definitely not after they're born. You shouldn't. If they're born alive, they shouldn't be killed. And I could see why she and then the women in white didn't want to clap about that, because after you've carried the child for that long and it's about to be born, it's such a burden, especially after it's born, for the mother after she gives birth to the child, that the child is actually breathing, and you can't clap for that. You can't clap because you still need to, I wouldn't exactly call that abort. I would call that a different word, because abort means stopping a process. I would give it a different word if the child was already born and lying there, breathing. I wouldn't call that after-birth abortion, so to speak. But that was the greatest State of the Union speech, and I suggest that you watch the entire thing. I think it's an hour and 21 minutes, but it's really good. The parties not necessarily have the right ideas. And if you're a Democrat, you have no idea that they've been transferring their guilt of Jim Crow South, the KKK, and owning slaves, and also denying women the right to vote. Did you know that? Democrats denied the women the right to vote. You want to know the reason why? They wanted to vote Federalist. They didn't want to vote Democrat. Now, most women are Democrat. African Americans overall are mostly Democrat. Some good things that Trump did. A couple of pardons. Matthew Charles and Alice Johnson, both of them on nonviolent drug convictions. Alice Johnson went to prison in 1997 for the rest of her life. Have a think about who was president in 1997. Well, there was a law. 3 strikes and you're out. Doesn't matter what the strike was. If you had 3 convictions, you were in jail for the rest of your life. So Alice Johnson, who became a grandmother in prison, went to jail for the rest of her life for a nonviolent drug conviction. She was in there for 22 years. And in that time, she became a minister, and she ministered to the other inmates. She became completely reformed. She was a good person to begin with. She probably needed money. That's why people sell drugs. Matthew Charles, similar, pardoned also. So she was reunited with her family and could finally be with the grandchildren that she couldn't see be born. And another thing Trump did, well, felons. He did a great thing to help felons that could be reformed. You see, there's a thing called Christianity. And in Christianity, the belief is, and Bill Clinton, who supposedly was a Christian, we used to see him go to church every Sunday. All the cameras would be out there, and then the SWAT teams would be on the roof. And he'd be going to church, and he'd turn around and he'd wave at the cameras. And he actually had Hollywood make him this fake Bible. It was an oversized Bible with this big gold cross on the front. And they say that there was actually nothing inside. During Prohibition, people used to hollow out the insides of Bibles. And inside there'd be a flask of liquor. With him, it was probably cocaine. He'd be sitting in the back of the church. Well, anyway, supposedly he was a Christian, but there was nothing in the Bible. So he didn't know about redemption and the fact that a person can be completely broken and do all sorts of crime, doesn't matter what the crime is, and then become born again instantly. Well, he signed the Prisoner Reform Act, and it's going to help, they say, disproportionately the Black community and minorities over whites, believe it or not. And help them, those that can be reformed. There's some that are lost for many reasons. And there's some that can be reformed and really need to work back in society I know if I did something, I would like a chance and help to get out and work myself back into society and be seen as a good person, as a productive member of society, and that my faults be forgiven and forgotten. Well, this helps. This plan helps these minorities work back into society so they can be productive. And another thing, RobertLJohnson, he was the founder of BET, Black Entertainment Television. Saw him on an interview, and he was with Trump in the Oval Office as Trump was signing this new policy that's going to really help the Black community, especially the Black community, because they lose their jobs often. They get laid off a lot. And every time you get laid off, the pension that you're building up for your retirement, they put money in, they lose thousands of dollars. They lose most of it. So by the end, they're impoverished when it comes to retirement age. Well, they keep all their money. So by the time they reach retirement age, they'll be living like upper middle class. It's going to put billions back in the descendant of slaves. Americans first, and all other minority Americans into those communities. It's going to be a huge change, especially for the African American community and the Hispanic community. Huge change. It's going to bring so many people up out of poverty. And this can only happen in a capitalist society because that's what capitalism does. It's the only system that brings people from impoverished conditions a way up, rather than in socialist conditions. There's the bottom rung, and the government takes all the money. You only get this much. And then there's this very small, like a pyramid, upper class, which is the government, which has all the money because they know what to do with it. Well, they asked in this interview of Robert Johnson, is Trump a racist? And he said, no, I don't believe that he is. This is going to really help the African American community in a big way. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton's husband, and Hillary Clinton called Black African Americans, descendants of slaves, super predators that should be brought to heel. And that word is spelled H-E-E-L, not H-E-A-L, not to be brought to heel like Jesus lays his hands and heals you, to heel, as she's your master and you are her. That was a really, really awful racist thing to say. Orville Faubus, the civil rights laws passed. He wanted to keep the schools segregated, yet Orville Faubus is one of Bill Clinton's mentors, and F. William Fulbright also. These are all KKK members against desegregating the schools. So he was the president, and she was the first lady. I think she's a woman. I do agree with that. So that's why on Let the Madness Begin, they called her Miss Mass Incarceration. They're speaking against, basically, President Obama, because he said, if to an audience of descendants of slaves, I say and Americans descendants of slaves, because they've been here longer than most of the white people in this country have been here. They're Americans first. He said to that audience that he will take it as a personal insult if you don't vote for Hillary. Personal insult to him and his legacy. He wants his legacy to continue with a woman who's a racist, who wants black men to be brought to heel to her feet because she called them super predators. And the 3 strikes and you're out sent thousands of African American fathers to jail for the rest of their lives. Apparently, the unemployment rate for Americans descended of slaves, Hispanics and Asians, and for women are at their all-time low. He's done so much. If you know about their lives and what happened to them with the welfare system, the Democrats funneled drugs because they were the ones in charge of these communities. And then they are the party of the KKK and were lynching people up to the year 1968. Funneled drugs into that community. They'd never known drugs before, but if you keep getting beaten down, even though you're working harder, and African Americans were working harder, longer hours than white people were, less illegitimacy rate, and they saw that they were climbing up very high, very fast. And if you are a racist, and those were the Democrats because that's the party of Jim Crow and KKK, and they wanted in the North and the South, the Democrats in the North and the South wanted slavery. They didn't want civil rights, North and South. There weren't good Democrats and bad Democrats. That's the way it was. And they saw the rise of the African Americans, how quickly they were rising after they were freed from slavery. And they were working hours that white people weren't working. And they were going to church, and they had whole intact families. So they funneled drugs into these communities, and they put in the welfare system, which required that the father not be in the home. They would literally go from door to door, knock on the door, make sure the father wasn't living there. So they literally broke up the family and signed in the immigration bill, which brought in people from other countries and HB1 visas, where the minimum wage was lowered. Our wages across the country for everyone was lowered. And so the fathers could not make enough money, and the mothers couldn't make enough money. And it broke up the homes, and it broke up the families, because minimum wage was depressed. Now, it was because when immigration was opened by an act of Ted Kennedy, his suggestion, it depressed the wages across the whole country for Americans because the new immigrants would work for less. And also the immigrants got on welfare as well. So there wasn't really enough money to help the minority communities that were Americans longer than most of us white Americans. So they destroyed, and for some reason they convinced you that the Democrat Party, see that's what the KKK would do if they want to stay in power. They're going to convince you that the Republicans, the party of abolition, is the party of slavery. And they're going to tell you that they're on your side and they've got jobs for you. And you know what? You can't make it on your own. Don't listen to Booker T. Washington. He said something very, very important. He said, don't act like a victim. You've been through slavery. I was a slave, he said, but I'm not going to live my life as if I was. He had the idea in his head. He lived successfully, but you see, they kept beating down the descendants of slaves, beating them down, and tried to convince them, no, you need our help. FDR in the 30s signed in the New Deal. We'll give you jobs. You need to be dependent on the government jobs. Keep voting us in, otherwise you're going to be impoverished. You need us. You need to be dependent because you're not smart enough. You can't make it on your own. And all the while you had George Washington Carver, the man, you look into his eyes, and to me, you could see a saint. There's something heavenly in his eyes. And that man was a slave. He was a horticulturist. And he was a genius. And he taught at a black college. And they didn't have enough money to the college for their lab department. They brought all the students to the dump to find things that they could use in the laboratory to create their own lab equipment. He was a genius. He never married. He slept in a single bed. Very quiet man, like a saint, really. In that community, the ability and the intelligence was there. However, it was the Democrat Party that kept beating you down, feeding you the drugs and telling you that you couldn't do it. You needed to be dependent on the government. And it was the Republican Party that's the racist. And they keep repeating the lines. Wasn't it Goebbels or something? Hitler's minister of propaganda. If you tell a big lie often enough, people are going to believe it. And people believed it. And then Margaret Sanger put abortion clinics in all these communities because she wanted to get rid of the minorities. She attended KKK meetings. She wanted to get rid of white trash, she called it, poor whites, and also mostly the black communities. And that's the party that's for abortion. More black babies were aborted in New York City alone in 2016 than were born alive. And you wonder why people who are in this country longer than most white people, right from the founding of this nation, why they're not 50% at least of the country. Why? That's why. But they made you helpless, and they put you in jail, and they convinced you couldn't do it, and you became depressed, and you took the drugs. Just like people, when they get depressed, have to take drugs. That's what happens. And you're hopeless. And you know that the mothers know they want to be like that princess and have that Prince Charming come and have that dedicated husband with them. But they know it's never going to happen because of the destruction of the black family in this country by the Democrat Party, who's run all these cities, inner cities, for the past 60 years. So you had a president tonight. I added a little more in there because of the whole racism thing. How this man is not the racist. But the woman that didn't win convinced you that he was a racist. And he's not, and he's never been a racist. 19 seasons of The Apprentice on NBC. Everyone in Hollywood loved him. Everyone in Hollywood's a Democrat. Do you honestly think they would have loved him and kept him on 19 seasons if he were a racist or Hitler? Everybody wanted to, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, they went to him and begged him for donations. And now he's Hitler. Hillary just hates him because he ran against her. And that's it. It was her turn to be president. How dare he do this? Let's destroy him. And he's the one bringing up the minorities in this country. He's the one doing everything that's anti-KKK, anti-Hitler, and anti-Democrat policies that have killed the Black community in every way you can imagine and mass incarcerated them. Good people that were going to church, intact families. There was nothing more beautiful. If you ever have been to a church, a Black church gospel, listen to that. There's no place that's closer to God than if you listen to a gospel choir in a church in the South. There's nothing closer to God. And you listen to it and say, my God, I'll never be there. I'll never get that close. And this is what was destroyed. But there are some that are still left. Like when you see Diamond and Silk, they're beautiful women. And they are remnants of that. And they believe in hope. They bought the Democrat lie, and they saw that there was hope for their community. But they're Americans first. Before me, before my family, they're Americans first. So there's hope and there's beauty. And this president is bringing it back. Good night, everyone. And please, I'll see if I can find a link to the State of the Union address, because I could go through the whole thing and tell you it, but I think you should listen to it and judge him for yourself. I know people say, well, it was written by writers. Please walk that back. Everything that he said in this speech is everything that he said on his own, because he didn't use totus. He spoke his own words. He looked at the crowd and spoke his own words throughout the campaign. Nobody wrote any of his speeches. And this speech tonight was made up of things he'd already said. It's kind of like Elvis when you see him in Jailhouse Rock. They had to choreograph those scenes because he was dancing along with a lot of other men on several different levels. And they all had to do the same thing. But what they did was they studied all his moves and they had to choreograph based on what he had already done. And he's another story. You say, oh, Elvis. Elvis is very interesting. And he was very unique. And if you look at Michael Jackson's moves, and then you see Elvis, who recorded his first song in 1953, My Happiness, for his mother. And then That's All Right Mama, his first hit, came out in 1954. He's been around a long time. So a lot of people look to him, and he opened up a lot of doors. And he might not be as white as you think he is. But that's another story. But like that, the writers who wrote this speech used everything that he's ever said. This is what Trump believes, and this is what he's said time and time again, put together in a speech. His manner was different tonight than it has been before. And I believe it was a very unifying speech. But anyway, thank you for joining me. Good night, everyone.